I shared my sandwich with a homeless man. Then he sat at the head of the table at my fiancé's family dinner. If you're here for heartfelt moments and unexpected turns, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Charlotte's hands trembled as she stared at the man sitting at the head of the mahogany table. The same weathered face, the same kind eyes. But instead of torn clothes and a tattered scarf, he wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. Now this, Harrison Cross said, pulling out her chair with the authority of someone who owned everything in sight, is a woman I trust. The entire dining room fell silent. Crystal glasses froze halfway to lips. Silverware clinked against fine china as it was hastily set down. Charlotte's fiancé, Eli, looked like he'd seen a ghost. Because 30 minutes ago, she'd given half her turkey sandwich to this homeless man outside the estate gates. And now he was introducing himself as Eli's father. The patriarch of one of the wealthiest families in the state had been testing her. And she had no idea what she'd just walked into. Let's go back to where this nightmare began. Charlotte Adams had been staring at her reflection in the rideshare window, trying to convince herself she looked acceptable. Her thrift store coat, a deep burgundy wool she'd found for $12, was clean and pressed. Her makeup, carefully applied with drugstore products and YouTube tutorials, highlighted her natural features without screaming, "I can't afford the good stuff." She was nervous, sure, but excited. Eli had finally invited her to meet his family after 8 months of dating. Just a small family dinner, he'd said. Nothing fancy. They'll love you. She'd pictured a cozy suburban home, maybe takeout Chinese food, folding chairs around a kitchen table. The kind of normal family gathering she'd grown up with before her parents passed away. When the rideshare pulled up to iron gates that stretched higher than most buildings, Charlotte's stomach dropped. "You sure this is the right address?" she asked the driver. He checked his phone. 1247 Millionaires Row. "This is it, lady." Through the gates, she could see a driveway that curved like a question mark, leading to what could only be described as a mansion. No, a palace. Stone columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and more windows than she could count. Charlotte's mouth went dry. This wasn't a family dinner. This was entering a different world entirely. The gates buzzed open automatically, but Charlotte couldn't move. She stood on the sidewalk, smoothing her coat obsessively, trying to calm her racing heart. A bitter November wind cut through the fabric, reminding her that while it looked decent, it wasn't exactly winter mansion material. She pulled out her phone to text Eli, then stopped. What would she say? "Hey, forgot to mention you're basically royalty." That's when she heard the shuffling footsteps. Cold day for standing around. Charlotte turned to see a man approaching from down the street. His clothes were layered but worn, a thick coat that had seen better decades, boots held together with what looked like duct tape, and a scarf that might have once been blue. His face was weathered, lined with years of hard living, but his eyes were remarkably kind. "Oh, I'm just..." Charlotte gestured vaguely at the intimidating gates. "Gathering courage, I guess." He chuckled, a warm sound that somehow made the wind feel less sharp. "Those places can be intimidating. All that money and marble." He paused, studying her with genuine curiosity. "You heading in there?" "Unfortunately, yes. First time, and hopefully last," Charlotte muttered, then immediately felt guilty. This man probably didn't have a warm place to sleep tonight, and here she was complaining about having dinner in a mansion. The man shifted, and she noticed him glance at the brown paper bag in her hands. Her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. "Excuse me," he said gently, "but would you mind sharing a bite? I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Charlotte's heart clenched. Without hesitation, she opened the bag and pulled out her carefully wrapped sandwich, turkey and mustard on day-old bread from the discount bakery. She'd made it that morning, planning to eat it on the way home if dinner was awkward. Now, looking at this man's hopeful expression, her own hunger seemed insignificant. "Of course," she said, tearing the sandwich cleanly in half. "It's not much, just turkey and mustard. Nothing glamorous." His face lit up as he accepted the half. "It's perfect. Thank you." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, eating. The sandwich tasted better somehow, shared with someone who truly needed it. "You know," the man said after swallowing, "kindness like this is rare. Most people walk right past." Charlotte shrugged. "Everyone's just trying to get by. We should help each other when we can. Not everyone sees it that way." He studied her face with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. "What's your name?" "Charlotte. Charlotte Adams." Well, Charlotte Adams, you've got something special. Don't let anyone in there. He nodded toward the mansion. Make you forget that. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely, but before she could ask what he meant, he was already backing away. Thank you for the sandwich, he called. And Charlotte, be yourself in there. That's all you need to be. Then he disappeared around the corner, leaving Charlotte with an empty bag and a strange feeling that their meeting hadn't been entirely coincidental. The butler who answered the door looked like he'd stepped out of a period drama. Perfectly pressed uniform, white gloves, and an expression that suggested he'd been carved from marble. Miss Adams, I presume? Master Eli is expecting you. Charlotte nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound she made. Her shoes seemed too loud on the marble floor. Her coat too shabby against the opulent backdrop. The foyer was larger than her entire apartment. A crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling painted with what looked like actual Renaissance art. Oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. If I may take your coat, the butler asked. Charlotte hesitated. Underneath, she wore her nicest dress, a simple black number she'd bought for job interviews. It was appropriate for a family dinner at a normal house. Here, it felt like wearing pajamas to the opera, but she couldn't keep the coat on all evening. She slipped it off and handed it over, trying not to wince as the butler's eyebrows rose slightly at its obviously discount origins. Master Eli will be down momentarily. The family is gathering in the dining room. He led her through hallways that belonged in a museum. Every few steps, Charlotte spotted something that was probably worth more than her car: a jade vase, a sculpture she was afraid to breathe near, paintings that looked suspiciously like originals she'd seen in art history textbooks. The dining room doors were massive oak things with intricate carved details. The butler pushed them open with ceremony, and Charlotte's breath caught. The room was a testament to old money. A table that could seat 20 people dominated the center, set with more silverware than Charlotte knew what to do with. Fresh flowers, expensive ones, not grocery store carnations, adorned the table in crystal vases. The chandelier here was even more elaborate than the one in the foyer, casting everything in warm, golden light. And around the table sat Eli's family. Charlotte recognized Eli immediately. He stood when he saw her, his face brightening with relief and something that might have been pride. He looked comfortable here in a way that should have been obvious. This was his world, after all. Charlotte. He moved toward her, but before he could reach her, a woman's voice cut through the air. So this is her. Eli's mother rose from her seat at the far end of the table. Victoria Cross was elegantly beautiful in the way that only serious money could buy. Perfect posture, salon-perfect hair, and jewelry that caught the light with practiced precision. Her dress was simple, but Charlotte could tell it cost more than 3 months of her rent. Mother, Eli said, reaching Charlotte's side and placing a protective hand on her back. This is Charlotte Adams. Charlotte, my mother, Victoria Cross. Victoria's smile was polite but arctic. How lovely to finally meet you, dear. Eli has told us so little about you. The words were perfectly pleasant, but Charlotte caught the underlying message. You're not important enough to discuss. It's wonderful to meet you too, Mrs. Cross. Thank you for including me tonight. Of course, we're always curious about Eli's friends. The pause before friends was deliberate, and Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could respond, 2 other women approached. Charlotte, these are my sisters, Vivian and Celeste. Vivian was clearly the older sister, early 30s, with Victoria's sharp beauty and an evaluating stare that made Charlotte feel like a bug under a microscope. Celeste looked younger, maybe Charlotte's age, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Lovely dress, Vivian said, and Charlotte couldn't tell if she was being sincere or sarcastic. Thank you. You look beautiful too. Because they did. Both sisters wore outfits that screamed designer labels and personal stylists. Where did you get it? Celeste asked with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Charlotte's mind raced. She could lie, make up some department store that sounded more expensive than it was. But the homeless man's words echoed in her head. Be yourself in there. That's all you need to be. Actually, I found it at a consignment shop. Sometimes you can find amazing pieces there. The sisters exchanged a look that Charlotte couldn't interpret. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. How resourceful, Victoria said finally. Dinner began, and Charlotte felt like she was navigating a minefield with every bite. The silverware alone was intimidating. She'd never seen so many forks for one meal. She tried to follow the others' lead, but there seemed to be an intricate system she hadn't been taught. The conversation was even worse. Vivian just got back from the Hamptons, Victoria said, cutting her impossibly perfect piece of what Charlotte thought might be beef Wellington. How was the Morrisons' party, darling? Divine as always. Though I do think they've been a bit too generous with the guest list lately. Quality over quantity, you know? Charlotte had no idea who the Morrisons were or what was wrong with their guest list. She focused on her food, which was admittedly incredible, while the conversation flowed around her like a foreign language. Speaking of parties, Celeste chimed in. Mother, did you decide about the charity gala? I know the committee is waiting for your answer about hosting. I'm still considering. The house in Martha's Vineyard might be more appropriate for the summer fundraiser. They had multiple houses. Of course they did. Charlotte, Eli said, clearly trying to bring her into the conversation. You work with children, right? Tell them about your job. All eyes turned to her, and Charlotte felt her palms sweat. I'm a daycare teacher. I work with 3- and 4-year-olds. How fulfilling, Victoria said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. It really is. There's something magical about watching children discover the world. Every day they learn something new, see something differently. It keeps you hopeful, you know? Charlotte warmed to her subject, forgetting for a moment where she was. Just last week, one of my kids, Marcus, was struggling with sharing. But by Friday, he was the first one to offer his crayons to a new student. These little moments of growth, they matter more than people realize. She looked up to find the table staring at her in silence. Vivian was examining her manicure. Celeste was checking her phone. Victoria looked like Charlotte had just announced her intention to rob a bank. Only Eli was smiling, but even his expression seemed strained. That's sweet, Victoria said finally. And what do your parents do, dear? The question hit Charlotte like a physical blow. They passed away a few years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte reached for her water glass and knocked it slightly, sending drops across the pristine tablecloth. A staff member appeared instantly to clean it up, making Charlotte feel even more conspicuous. I'm sorry for your loss, Victoria said, but her tone remained coolly polite. The conversation moved on to safer territory for them. Talk of polo matches, private jets, summer houses in places Charlotte had only seen in movies. Each topic was another reminder that she didn't belong here. Charlotte tried to contribute where she could, but every attempt felt wrong. When they discussed their upcoming trip to Paris, she mentioned having always wanted to visit the Louvre. The silence that followed suggested this was either obvious or naive. She couldn't tell which. She reached for what she thought was the right fork and saw Vivian smirk. She laughed at what she thought was a joke and realized too late it wasn't meant to be funny. Under the table, Eli found her hand and squeezed it gently. It should have been comforting, but instead it made her feel like a charity case he was trying to protect. This was a mistake. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Just as Charlotte was contemplating how quickly she could escape to the bathroom and call a rideshare, the butler appeared in the doorway. Pardon the interruption, he said with more deference than he'd shown Charlotte. Mr. Cross has arrived. The change in the room was immediate and dramatic. Victoria straightened in her chair, suddenly looking less ice queen and more anxious hostess. Vivian and Celeste stopped their whispered conversation. Even Eli sat up straighter. He's early, Victoria muttered, glancing at an elegant watch. We weren't expecting him until after dinner. Should I have the staff prepare another place setting? The butler asked. Of course. The head of the table. Charlotte looked around the table, confused. There was clearly a head of the table, where Victoria had been sitting. But as staff members began efficiently rearranging place settings, she realized they were preparing the opposite end, the seat that had remained empty all evening. Who's Mr. Cross? Charlotte whispered to Eli. Before he could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Measured, confident steps that seemed to command attention even from a distance. The butler stepped aside, and a man entered the dining room. Charlotte's world tilted. It was him, the homeless man from outside, but transformed in a way that defied logic. Gone were the layered, worn clothes. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for his frame, which it probably had. His hair, which had been hidden under a knit cap, was silver gray and perfectly styled. His face, now clean-shaven, revealed strong jawline and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. But it was definitely him. The same kind eyes that had looked at her with such understanding outside the gates. The same warm voice that now filled the room with quiet authority. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, and Charlotte's breath caught because she recognized the cadence, the gentle humor in his tone. The entire family stood. Charlotte, in shock, remained seated until Eli pulled her to her feet. "Dad," Eli said, and Charlotte felt the room spin. Perfect timing. "I'd like you to meet Charlotte Adams." "Charlotte, this is my father, Harrison Cross." Harrison Cross. The Harrison Cross. Charlotte had heard the name even in her limited exposure to business news. Real estate empire, charitable foundations, one of the wealthiest men in the state. And she'd given him half her turkey sandwich. Harrison's eyes met hers across the room, and she saw a flicker of the same warmth from their earlier encounter. "Charlotte," he said, moving around the table toward her. "How lovely to finally meet you." The family looked confused by his phrasing. Victoria stepped forward. "Harrison, we weren't expecting you until later. I do hope business went well in the city." Business went very well indeed. He reached Charlotte and, to everyone's shock, pulled out her chair himself, the chair that had been hastily moved to his right side when the place settings were rearranged. "Please," he said, "sit." "I insist." Charlotte's legs felt weak. She sank into the chair, hyper-aware that every eye in the room was on her. Harrison took his place at the head of the table, and Charlotte realized she was now sitting in the position of honor, the most important seat after his own. "I hope you don't mind," Harrison said, addressing the table but looking at Charlotte. "But I've already had the pleasure of sharing a meal with Charlotte this evening." The silence was deafening. Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry. About an hour ago, actually. Outside the gates. Charlotte was kind enough to share her dinner with me." Eli looked from his father to Charlotte, pieces clearly clicking into place. You met outside?" "We did indeed." Harrison smiled at Charlotte, and she saw nothing but warmth in his expression. "And I can tell you all something important about this young woman." The entire table leaned forward slightly. "She has a generous heart. When she thought I was a stranger in need, she didn't hesitate to help. Didn't ask questions, didn't make judgments. Just saw someone who was hungry and shared what she had." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. The kindness in his voice, the way he was defending her to his family, it was overwhelming. "That," Harrison continued, looking around the table at his wife and daughters, "is the mark of true character. Not the clothes someone wears, or the schools they attended, or the size of their bank account, but how they treat people when they think no one important is watching." Victoria's face had gone pale. Vivian was staring at her plate. Celeste looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. "Now," Harrison said, settling back in his chair with satisfaction, "I believe we were having dinner. Please, don't let me interrupt." But the entire dynamic of the evening had shifted. The woman who minutes ago had been the outsider, the one who didn't belong, was now sitting at the right hand of the most powerful person in the room. And everyone knew it. The rest of dinner passed in a surreal haze for Charlotte. Harrison, who had seemed so humble and gentle as a homeless man, commanded the room with quiet authority. But his attention kept returning to her, asking about her work, her life, her thoughts on everything from childhood education to social responsibility. Charlotte mentioned she works with children, he said to the table at large. "Tell me, Charlotte, what drew you to that field?" Under his encouraging gaze, Charlotte found her voice again. "I think children see the world so clearly. They haven't learned yet that kindness is supposed to be conditional or that some people matter more than others. They just love, openly and completely." Fascinating perspective. Harrison leaned forward, genuinely interested. "I imagine that takes considerable patience." "It does, but it gives back so much more than it takes. These kids trust you with their fears, their excitement, their discoveries. It's an honor, really." Victoria cleared her throat. "Harrison, perhaps Charlotte would be interested in our foundation's educational initiatives." It was a transparent attempt to regain control of the conversation, but Harrison simply nodded. "Perhaps, though I imagine Charlotte's insights would be valuable in shaping those initiatives rather than simply participating in them." The implication was clear. Charlotte wasn't a recipient of their charity, but someone whose expertise they could learn from. Vivian tried next. "Charlotte, you must tell us about your background." Where did you grow up? Connecticut, actually. Small town called Milford. My parents ran a little diner there. How quaint, Vivian said, and Charlotte caught the condescension in her tone. But Harrison's response surprised everyone. Milford. I know it well. There's a little place there, Mickey's Diner, isn't it? Best apple pie I've ever had. Charlotte's eyes widened. That was my parents' place. Mickey was my father. The shock on Harrison's face was genuine. Mickey and Rose Adams were your parents? You knew them? I drove through Milford every month for business when I was starting out. Your parents fed me many times when I was just a young man with more ambition than money. They never made me feel like I was anything less than family. Charlotte felt tears spring to her eyes. They would have been so happy to know you remembered them. Remembered them? Charlotte, your father gave me business advice that I still use today. And your mother? Harrison smiled softly. She had a way of making everyone feel important. I can see where you got that gift. The rest of the table had gone silent. This wasn't just their patriarch being polite to Eli's girlfriend anymore. This was personal history, shared connection, genuine affection. They would have been proud of you, Harrison continued. Not just for who you've become, but for how you've chosen to spend your life. Making a difference for children, treating strangers with kindness. That's the legacy they left you. Charlotte had to excuse herself to the bathroom to compose herself. When she returned, she found the dynamic had shifted again. Victoria was asking careful questions about her work, actually listening to the answers. Celeste had put away her phone. Even Vivian seemed to be making an effort. But it was Eli's behavior that confused her most. He seemed uncomfortable, not proud or relieved that his family was finally accepting her, but almost annoyed by his father's attention to her. When dinner ended, Harrison invited Charlotte to join him in his study for coffee while the rest of the family retired to the sitting room. The study was smaller than the other rooms, but somehow more intimidating. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and the massive desk was covered with papers and reports that probably influenced decisions affecting thousands of people. I owe you an apology, Harrison said as soon as the door closed behind them. An apology? For what? For deceiving you earlier. Though in my defense, it wasn't entirely planned. He gestured to a pair of leather chairs by the fireplace. Please sit. Charlotte sank into the chair, which was more comfortable than her entire couch at home. I do that sometimes, Harrison continued, settling across from her. Dress down, walk around the city. It's amazing what you learn about people when they don't know who you are. But why were you outside your own house? Harrison chuckled. I'd been in meetings all day downtown. My driver was stuck in traffic, so I decided to walk. I live about 10 blocks from here. This is the family estate, where we host dinners and events. When I saw you standing outside the gates looking nervous, I was curious. Curious about what? About the woman my son has been so secretive about. Eli has mentioned you exactly 3 times in 8 months, Charlotte. Each time, he's changed the subject quickly. Charlotte's stomach dropped. He's embarrassed by me. I don't think it's embarrassment. I think it's fear. Of what? Harrison studied her face carefully. Fear that his family will do exactly what they started to do tonight. Judge you based on surface things instead of who you really are. And who am I, really? The question came out more vulnerable than Charlotte intended. You're someone who shares her sandwich with a stranger. You're someone who sees value in working with children instead of chasing money. You're someone who treats people with kindness regardless of their apparent station in life. Harrison leaned forward. You're someone your parents raised right. Charlotte felt tears threatening again. Your family doesn't think so. My family has been wealthy for so long. They've forgotten what really matters. They've forgotten that money is a tool, not a measure of worth. He paused. But they're learning tonight. Because you told them to? Because you showed them. The woman who gave half her dinner to a stranger, who spoke passionately about her work, who treated everyone at that table with respect even when they weren't returning it. That woman impressed them. I don't think Eli sees it that way. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. What makes you say that? He looked uncomfortable, like he wished you hadn't paid so much attention to me. Eli has always struggled with the family wealth. He wants to be normal, to have normal relationships. But he also likes the security that money provides. It's a difficult balance. Charlotte thought about this. He's kept me separate from all this. Never told me about the money, the houses, any of it. And how does that make you feel? Like he doesn't trust me. Like he thinks I'm the kind of person who would be with him for his money instead of who he is. Harrison nodded slowly. That's a fear many wealthy people live with. But it's not fair to judge someone without giving them the chance to prove who they are. Is that what tonight was? A test. Not intentionally, but sometimes life provides the tests we need. Harrison smiled. And Charlotte, you passed with flying colors. When they rejoined the family in the sitting room, Charlotte immediately sensed tension. Eli was standing by the window, his posture rigid. Victoria and the girls were seated on the sofa, their conversation stilted. Everything all right? Harrison asked, though his tone suggested he knew it wasn't. Fine, Eli said quickly. Just thinking we should probably head out soon. Charlotte has work tomorrow. It was only 9:30. Charlotte looked at him in confusion, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Actually, Harrison said, I was hoping Charlotte might stay for breakfast. I'd love to hear more about her ideas for childhood education reform. Dad, I think, Victoria interrupted smoothly. That would be lovely. Charlotte, you must stay the night. We have plenty of guest rooms. The invitation was clearly not genuine, but it put Eli in an impossible position. He couldn't refuse his mother's hospitality without looking rude, but Charlotte could tell he desperately wanted to leave. That's very kind, Charlotte said carefully. But I should probably get home. Nonsense, Harrison said firmly. I insist. Besides, it would give us a chance to continue our conversation about your parents' diner. I have so many stories to share. Eli's jaw tightened. Dad, Charlotte is probably tired. I'm fine, Charlotte said, making her decision. Something was happening here, some undercurrent she didn't understand, but she wasn't going to let Eli make decisions for her. I'd love to stay. Eli looked like he wanted to argue, but Harrison clapped his hands together. Wonderful. Victoria, would you have Mrs. Henderson prepare the blue guest room? As Victoria went to arrange accommodations, Harrison turned to Eli. Son, walk with me for a moment. It wasn't a request. Eli followed his father out of the room, leaving Charlotte with Vivian and Celeste. The silence stretched uncomfortably. So, Vivian said finally, you and father seem to have quite the connection. Charlotte couldn't tell if it was an observation or an accusation. He's very kind. He is that, Celeste agreed. Sometimes too kind. He has a tendency to get invested in people. What do you mean? The sisters exchanged a look. Father has always been drawn to what he calls authentic people, Vivian explained. Sometimes to the detriment of more practical considerations. Charlotte was getting tired of speaking in code. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're trying to say. We're just saying, Celeste said carefully, that father's approval can be overwhelming. People don't always handle it well. And we'd hate to see anyone get hurt, Vivian added with false sweetness. The message was clear, don't get too comfortable. This isn't permanent. But before Charlotte could respond, raised voices echoed from down the hall. Not yelling, exactly, but intense conversation that carried despite closed doors. The sisters pretended not to notice, but Charlotte could make out fragments. Not about the money. Exactly about the money. Giving her false hope. Treating her like a charity case. Charlotte's cheeks burned. They were talking about her. Arguing about her. And everyone in this room could hear it. Perhaps, Vivian said pointedly, we should put on some music. When the voices in the hall finally stopped, only Eli returned to the sitting room. His face was flushed, and he avoided Charlotte's eyes. Ready to go? He asked tersely. I thought I was staying the night. Plans changed. Harrison appeared in the doorway behind him. Eli seems to think you'd be more comfortable at home. Of course, the invitation stands if you change your mind. Charlotte looked between father and son, reading the tension in their identical stubborn expressions. Actually, I think Eli's right. I should go home. The ride back to Charlotte's apartment was silent until they were halfway there. So, she said finally, when were you planning to tell me you're basically royalty? Eli's hands tightened on the steering wheel. It's not that simple, isn't it? You've been lying to me for 8 months, Eli. Not just about the money, but about your family, your life, everything. I wasn't lying. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the definition of lying. They sat at a red light, the silence heavy between them. Why? Charlotte asked quietly. Did you think I was some kind of gold digger? That I couldn't handle knowing? It's not about what you can handle. It's about what other people assume. What other people? Or what you assume. Eli sighed heavily. Do you know how many women have been interested in me once they found out about my family's money? Do you know how many relationships I've watched turn toxic the moment wealth entered the equation? So you decided not to give me the choice to prove I'm different. I was protecting us both. Charlotte stared out the window. They were in her neighborhood now, passing the laundromat where she did her washing, the corner store where she bought groceries with coupons. Your father seems to think I proved who I am tonight. My father, Eli said bitterly, has always been naive about people's motivations. Naive? Or just more trusting than you are? They pulled up in front of Charlotte's building, a converted Victorian that had seen better decades, divided into 6 small apartments. After the mansion, it looked even shabbier than usual. Charlotte, Eli said as she reached for the door handle. I'm trying to protect what we have. By keeping me separate from your real life? By hiding who you are? By acting ashamed of me in front of your family? I'm not ashamed of you. Then why did you look so uncomfortable when your father was being kind to me? Why did you want to leave the moment he showed me respect? Eli was quiet for a long moment. Because I could see it in your eyes. See what? The moment you realized what our life could be like. The houses, the travel, the security. And I could see you starting to want it. Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. You think I care about your money? I think everyone cares about money when they don't have it. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Charlotte felt something crack inside her chest. Get out of the car, she said quietly. Charlotte, get out of the car and come upstairs with me. What? If you think I'm with you for your money, then you don't know me at all. And I want to show you exactly who you've been dating for 8 months. Charlotte's apartment was exactly 400 square feet of carefully organized life. A Murphy bed that folded into the wall, a kitchenette that consisted of a mini fridge, hot plate, and microwave, a small table that served as desk, dining room, and craft station depending on the time of day. But it was clean, welcoming, and filled with evidence of a life lived with intention. This is it, Charlotte said, spreading her arms wide. This is what I was supposedly trying to escape by dating you. Eli stood in the doorway, taking it in. The handmade curtains, the furniture that was clearly secondhand but lovingly maintained, the walls covered with children's artwork and thank you notes. Charlotte, I didn't mean. Look around, Eli. Really look. She walked to the small bookshelf, pulling out a photo album. These are pictures from the diner. My parents never made much money, but they fed anyone who was hungry. My dad used to say that wealth wasn't about what you had, but about what you could give. She flipped through pages of memories, her parents serving coffee to truckers, hosting community fundraisers, organizing food drives during the holidays. After they died, I could have sold the diner, taken the money, and lived differently. But do you know what I did? Eli shook his head. I gave it to the employees who had worked there for decades. Because that's what my parents would have wanted. She moved to her desk, pulling out a shoebox filled with letters. These are thank you notes from parents of kids I've taught. Look at this one. She handed him a card. Little Jimmy's mom wrote this after he finally learned to read. She was a single mother working 3 jobs, and she cried when she wrote this because she thought her son would never catch up. Charlotte pulled out another letter. This one is from Maria's grandmother. Maria was so shy she wouldn't speak in class for 2 months. Her grandmother wrote to tell me that Maria came home every day talking about Miss Charlotte and how I made her feel brave. She set the letters on the table between them. This is my wealth, Eli. These moments where I get to make a difference in someone's life. These connections, these relationships, this is what matters to me. Eli picked up one of the letters, reading it slowly. Charlotte watched his expression change as he absorbed the genuine gratitude, the lives touched, the difference she made every day. I'm not saying money doesn't matter, Charlotte continued. I know what it's like to choose between groceries and heat. I know what it's like to wear the same outfit to 3 different events because it's the only nice thing you own. But I also know that having money doesn't make you a better person, and not having it doesn't make you worse. She walked to her tiny kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Inside were carefully organized leftovers, a few basic staples, and a container labeled Emergency Sandwich Fund, bread, lunch meat, and condiments set aside specifically for moments like the one she'd had with Harrison. I make sandwiches every Sunday, she said quietly. Not just for me, but extras. Because you never know when you'll meet someone who needs one more than you do. Eli stared at the container, understanding dawning on his face. The man I shared my sandwich with tonight, I didn't know he was your father. I didn't know he was testing me. I just saw someone who was hungry, and I had food to share. That's who I am, Eli. That's who I've always been. She closed the refrigerator and turned to face him fully. So when you suggest that I was looking at your family's wealth with greedy eyes, when you assume that I'm calculating what I could gain by being with you, you're not protecting our relationship. You're insulting everything I believe in. Eli set down the letter he'd been holding and looked around the apartment again. But this time Charlotte could see him really seeing it. The care that went into every detail, the way she'd made a small space feel like home, the evidence everywhere of a life lived with purpose and generosity. I was wrong, he said quietly. Yes, you were. Not just about tonight. About everything. About keeping you separate from my family. About not trusting you with the truth. About assuming you'd change if you knew. Charlotte sat down on her small couch, suddenly exhausted. Why, Eli? Why did you assume the worst about me? He joined her on the couch, careful not to crowd her. Because it's easier. Easier than what? Easier than believing that someone could love me for who I am instead of what I have. Easier than trusting that someone won't leave when they realize how complicated my world is. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Charlotte had seen him make when he was stressed, but had never understood the depth of. Do you know what it's like to never be sure if someone likes you or likes your bank account? To wonder if every laugh is genuine or calculated? To have people treat you differently the moment they learn your last name? Charlotte felt her anger soften slightly, but she wasn't ready to let him off the hook entirely. So instead of finding out what kind of person I really am, you decided to control the narrative. Keep me in this separate box where I could never disappoint you. Yes, that's not a relationship, Eli. That's you playing house with a version of me that you created. They sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, Charlotte could hear her neighbor's television, the sound of cars passing on the street, the normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. Your father figured out who I was in 5 minutes, Charlotte said finally. My father has always been better at reading people than I am. Or maybe he's just more willing to give them a chance. Eli nodded slowly. He likes you. I like him too. He reminds me of my dad, actually. Successful, but not arrogant about it. Wealthy, but not disconnected from what really matters. He asked me tonight why I've been hiding you. What did you tell him? The truth. That I was scared. Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him. Underneath the expensive clothes and privileged upbringing, she could see the uncertainty, the fear of not being enough, the same insecurities everyone carried regardless of their bank balance. What are you scared of now, she asked. That I've ruined everything. That you'll realize you deserve someone who trusts you from the beginning, who doesn't make assumptions about your character, who's brave enough to let you see all of who they are. Charlotte considered this. Part of her wanted to be angry, to make him work harder for forgiveness. But she could see genuine remorse in his expression, real understanding of what he'd done wrong. I am angry, she admitted, and hurt, and disappointed that you thought so little of me. I know, but I also understand being scared. When you've been hurt before, it's natural to want to protect yourself. Have you been hurt before? Charlotte smiled sadly. Everyone has, Eli. The difference is whether you let that fear control you or whether you choose to trust anyway. What would it take for you to trust me again? Honesty. Complete honesty. No more separate worlds. No more protection from your complicated life. If we're going to be together, we're going to be together in all of it. Eli nodded. What else? I need you to trust me. Really trust me. Trust that I'm with you because I love who you are, not what you have. Trust that I can handle your world without losing myself in it. And if my family doesn't accept you? Charlotte thought about dinner, about the way Victoria had looked at her dress, about Vivian and Celeste's barely concealed condescension. Then we'll deal with that together. But Eli, your father already accepts me. And he's the one who matters most, isn't he? He is. He's also the one who taught me that character matters more than anything else. I should have listened to that lesson a long time ago. You're listening now. They talked until nearly 3 in the morning. About his childhood in the shadow of wealth. About her parents and the values they'd instilled. About their fears and hopes and the future they might build together. When Eli finally left, Charlotte felt cautiously optimistic. The foundation of their relationship had been shaken, but maybe they could build something stronger on more honest ground. She didn't expect to hear from Harrison Cross the next day. Charlotte was in the middle of story time, reading The Giving Tree to a circle of wide-eyed 4-year-olds, when the daycare director knocked on her classroom door. Charlotte, there's someone here to see you. Through the window in the door, Charlotte could see a figure in an expensive suit. Her heart sank, assuming Eli had come to continue their conversation from the night before. Can you watch the kids for a minute? She asked her assistant teacher. But when she stepped into the hallway, it wasn't Eli waiting for her. It was Harrison Cross, looking slightly out of place among the colorful children's artwork and tiny furniture, but somehow completely comfortable. Mr. Cross, what are you doing here? I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you, and I thought your workplace might tell me something about who you are. He gestured around the hallway, taking in the displays of children's art, the carefully organized coat hooks at toddler height, the bulletin board filled with photos of kids engaged in various learning activities. It's beautiful, he said, and Charlotte could tell he meant it. You can feel the love here. Thank you. But I'm confused. Why did you want to see me? Because I owe you an apology, and I wanted to make you an offer. Charlotte's heart skipped. An apology? For my son's behavior last night, and for my family's initial reception of you. I'm afraid wealth sometimes makes people forget their manners. You don't need to apologize for other people's choices. Perhaps not. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in the Cross family judges people by their clothing or their bank account. Through the window, Charlotte could see her kids getting restless. Little Marcus was pulling Emma's hair, and it looked like tears were imminent. I should get back to my class. Of course. But Charlotte, would you consider having lunch with me today? There's something I'd like to discuss. They met at a small cafe near the daycare. Not the kind of place Charlotte imagined Harrison Cross usually frequented, but he'd insisted on somewhere convenient for her. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, he said after they'd ordered. About childhood education, about the importance of seeing every child's potential. It's something I'm passionate about. That was clear, and it got me thinking about our foundation's educational initiatives. Charlotte felt a familiar wariness. Mr. Cross, if you're offering me charity, I'm offering you a job. She blinked. I'm sorry. Our foundation has been struggling to find the right person to head our childhood development programs. We need someone who understands education from the ground up, someone who's actually worked with children, someone who shares our values about making a real difference. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is what we're looking for. Take a look. Charlotte opened the folder and found a detailed job description. Director of Childhood Development Initiatives. Salary that was more than double what she made at the daycare. Benefits that included health insurance, retirement planning, and a budget for continuing education. But it was the job responsibilities that made her breath catch. Developing programs for underserved communities. Training teachers in innovative educational approaches. Creating resources for parents who couldn't afford traditional early childhood education. She started, then stopped, overwhelmed. This is a chance to help thousands of children instead of dozens, Harrison said gently. To take everything you've learned in your classroom and scale it up to make a broader impact. Why me? Because you shared your sandwich with a stranger. Because you spoke about your work with genuine passion. Because in one evening, you showed my family what authentic character looks like. Charlotte read through the folder again, her mind racing. This feels like too much of a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. It's recognition. I've been looking for the right person for this position for 6 months. I've interviewed candidates with advanced degrees, years of administrative experience, impressive resumes. But none of them had what you have. What do I have? Heart, vision, the ability to see potential where others see problems. The understanding that every child matters, regardless of their circumstances. Charlotte set down the folder, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Cross, I appreciate this, I really do. But I can't accept a job just because I'm dating your son. Harrison's expression grew serious. Charlotte, let me be very clear about something. This offer has nothing to do with Eli. In fact, he doesn't even know I'm making it. He doesn't. After our conversation last night, I realized he's been so focused on protecting you from our world that he's never asked what you might want to contribute to it. This position existed before you walked into our dining room. It will exist regardless of whether you and Eli work out your relationship. He leaned forward, his expression intense. I'm offering this to you because you're qualified, because you're passionate, and because I believe you could make a real difference. Your relationship with my son is entirely separate. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had seen her potential, had believed in her abilities enough to offer her a chance to grow? I need time to think about it. Of course. But Charlotte. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Don't let fear hold you back. Not fear of what people will think, not fear of whether you're qualified, not even fear of how this might complicate things with Eli. What if I'm not ready for something this big? The woman who turned a 400 square foot apartment into a home, who makes extra sandwiches for strangers, who can get a room full of 4-year-olds to sit still for story time. That woman is ready for anything. Charlotte didn't tell Eli about the job offer immediately. She needed time to process, to figure out how she felt about it separate from her relationship with him. But when he picked her up for dinner 2 nights later, she could tell something was different about him too. "You look nervous," she observed as they walked toward the restaurant. "I have something to tell you. About my conversation with my father the other night." Charlotte's stomach dropped. Had Harrison told Eli about the job offer despite saying he wouldn't? They were seated at a quiet table before Eli continued. "He read me the riot act. About how I've been treating you, about my assumptions, about keeping you separate from my life. Oh, he also told me something I didn't know. About your parents." Charlotte looked up from her menu. "What about them?" "That they helped him when he was starting his business. That your father gave him advice that influenced some of his biggest early decisions. That your mother made him feel like family when he was far from home and struggling." He mentioned that at dinner. But what he didn't mention at dinner was the loan. Charlotte frowned. "What loan?" "When my father was 25, he needed capital to make his first major property investment. Banks wouldn't touch him. He was too young, too unproven. But your father gave him $5,000 from the diner's savings." $5,000. Charlotte knew how much that would have meant to her parents, how long they would have had to save to accumulate that kind of money. Dad tried to pay them back with interest a few years later, when his business started taking off. Your parents refused to take more than the original amount. Said the interest should go to someone else who needed help getting started. Charlotte felt tears welling up. It sounded exactly like something her parents would do. "There's more," Eli continued. "My father started a scholarship fund in their honor after they died, for students who want to go into education. He's been funding it anonymously for 3 years. I didn't know. Neither did I. And Charlotte, I've been thinking about what that means." She waited for him to continue. "It means that our families have been connected for decades. It means that my father's success is partially built on your parents' generosity and wisdom. It means that you being in my life isn't some random coincidence. It's like the universe bringing our families back together." Charlotte wasn't sure how she felt about the idea of cosmic destiny, but she could see how much this revelation meant to Eli. "There's something else," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I want you to meet my extended family. My grandfather, my aunts and uncles, my cousins. I want you to see all of it. The good, the bad, the complicated. No more hiding. Eli, and I want to meet your family too. Your friends, your colleagues, everyone who's important to you. I want to understand your world the way I should have from the beginning." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "That's what I wanted all along. I know, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." They talked through dinner about their families, their histories, their dreams for the future. But Charlotte still didn't mention the job offer. Something held her back, not distrust exactly, but a need to make this decision independently, to know that whatever choice she made was her own. After dinner, as they walked back to Eli's car, he surprised her again. "There's one more thing. I talked to my father about us, about our relationship, about the future. And, and he said something that stuck with me. He said that when you find someone who makes you want to be better, someone who challenges you to grow, someone who sees potential in you that you don't see in yourself, you don't let that person go." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Charlotte, you make me want to be braver, more trusting, more generous. You make me want to use the privileges I was born with to make a difference, not just accumulate more wealth. Eli, I love you. Not the version of you that I tried to keep separate from my complicated world, but all of you. Your passion for your work, your generosity with strangers, your ability to see good in people even when they don't deserve it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Charlotte's heart stopped. "This isn't a proposal," he said quickly, seeing her expression. "Not yet, but it's a promise." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, not an engagement ring, but something more delicate, more personal. "It's a promise that I'm done hiding, done being afraid, done treating our relationship like something fragile instead of something strong enough to handle whatever comes." He took the ring from the box. "Will you wear this? As a symbol that we're building something real together, something honest, something that can withstand both our families." both our worlds, both our fears. Charlotte looked at the ring, at Eli's hopeful expression, at the future that seemed to be opening up before them. And she realized she had to tell him about the job offer. "Before I answer," Charlotte said, "there's something I need to tell you." Eli's expression immediately grew concerned. "What is it?" "Your father offered me a job." "What?" Eli lowered the ring box, his face cycling through confusion, surprise, and something that might have been hurt. "When, 2 days ago, he came to the daycare and asked me to lunch. And you didn't tell me?" Charlotte could see the old fears creeping back into his expression, the assumption that she was keeping secrets, that she was being influenced by his family's money. "I didn't tell you because I needed to figure out how I felt about it without considering how it would affect us." "How you felt about what exactly?" Charlotte explained the position, the responsibilities, the salary, the opportunity to impact thousands of children instead of dozens. As she talked, she watched Eli's expression change from suspicion to understanding to something like pride. "That's incredible," he said when she finished. "It's perfect for you. Is it? Or is it just charity from your family?" "Charlotte, my father doesn't do charity jobs. If he offered you this position, it's because he believes you're the best person for it. But the timing is coincidental. Or maybe it's not." Eli took her hand again. "Maybe it's the universe saying that you belong in our world, not as my girlfriend or my wife, but as yourself, as someone who has something valuable to contribute." Charlotte felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lift from her shoulders. "You really think I could do it?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to. I think you could revolutionize childhood education. I think you could change thousands of lives. It would mean working closely with your family. It would mean having your own relationship with my family, separate from me. Your own place in that world that has nothing to do with who you're dating." Charlotte realized this was the answer to a problem she hadn't known how to articulate. She'd been afraid of being seen as Eli's girlfriend first and Charlotte Adams second. But this job would establish her as her own person, with her own expertise, her own value to contribute. "There's one more thing," she said. "If I take this job, and if we stay together, people will always wonder if I'm with you for your money. People will always wonder about something. People who matter will see who you really are." He held up the ring again. "So what do you say? Will you wear this as a promise that we're in this together?" All of it. The complicated family dynamics, the public scrutiny, the questions people will ask, the assumptions they'll make. Charlotte looked at the ring, then at Eli's face. She could see the boy who was afraid of being used for his money, but she could also see the man who was learning to trust, to be vulnerable, to believe in love that transcended circumstances. "Yes," she said, "but on one condition. Anything. I want to earn my place in your world. This job, our relationship, my acceptance by your family. All of it needs to be based on who I am and what I contribute, not on who I'm dating." "Deal." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the light from the street lamp above them. "How did you know my ring size?" Eli grinned. "I asked your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Turns out she's been hoping someone would make an honest woman of you." Charlotte laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. "What happens now?" "Now we go tell my father you're accepting his job offer. And then we start planning our life together. All of it, honestly, openly, without fear." The next morning, Charlotte walked into Harrison Cross's office at the foundation headquarters. The building was impressive but not ostentatious, filled with photos and displays showcasing the various programs they funded. "Charlotte," Harrison said, rising from behind his desk, "I hope you have good news for me." "I do. I'd like to accept the position." Harrison's face broke into a genuine smile. "Excellent. I think you're going to do amazing things here. I have some conditions." "I'm listening." "I want to start small. Maybe pilot a program in one underserved community before we scale up. I want to make sure I understand the real challenges, not just the theoretical ones." "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need." "What else?" "I want to continue working directly with children, at least part-time. I don't want to lose touch with the classroom experience." "We can arrange that. In fact, I think having our director actively teaching would strengthen all our programs." Charlotte took a deep breath. "And I want it clearly understood that this job has nothing to do with my relationship with Eli. I need to succeed or fail on my own merits." Harrison's expression grew serious. "Charlotte, let me be very clear about something. The moment you prove you can't do this job, you'll be fired." Family connections don't buy job security in my organization. Good. But I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think you're going to exceed every expectation we have. They spent the next hour going over the details: start date, initial projects, team structure, budget allocations. By the time Charlotte left the building, she felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She was walking toward the subway when a familiar voice called her name. Charlotte. She turned to see Victoria Cross approaching, looking elegant as always, but somehow less intimidating than she had at dinner. Mrs. Cross. What a surprise. I was hoping to catch you. Harrison told me about your new position. Charlotte braced herself for criticism or condescension, but Victoria's next word surprised her. I owe you an apology. You do? For my behavior at dinner the other night. I was rude, judgmental, and unwelcoming. It was inexcusable. Charlotte didn't know how to respond. Thank you for saying that. I want you to understand something about our family. We've had experiences with people who were interested in us for the wrong reasons. It's made us defensive, perhaps overly so. I understand. But Harrison is right. Character matters more than background. And you showed more character in one evening than many people show in a lifetime. Victoria paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. I also want you to know that this job opportunity is legitimate. My husband doesn't make charity hires. If he offered you this position, it's because he believes you're the best person for it. That means a lot to hear. I hope we can start over. I'd like to get to know the woman who's captured my son's heart and my husband's respect. Charlotte smiled. I'd like that too. As Victoria walked away, Charlotte realized something had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer the outsider looking in, hoping to be accepted. She was Charlotte Adams, soon-to-be Director of Childhood Development Initiatives, who happened to be dating Eli Cross. She had her own place in this world now, her own value to contribute, her own relationships to build. 6 months later, Charlotte stood in front of a newly renovated community center in one of the city's most underserved neighborhoods. The sign by the door read, "The Mickey and Rose Adams Early Learning Center," the pilot program she developed, named in honor of her parents. Inside, 24 children from ages 3 to 5 were engaged in various learning activities designed around the latest research in childhood development. But more than that, they were happy, engaged, excited to learn. Miss Charlotte, Marcus, who had been one of her students at the daycare, ran up to her with a drawing. Look what I made. The picture showed a family of stick figures under a rainbow. It's beautiful, Marcus. Tell me about it. That's my mom, and that's me, and that's my baby sister. And that's you, because you're part of our family too. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, the same reaction she'd had countless times over the past months as she watched the program exceed every expectation. Charlotte. She turned to see Eli approaching with a man she didn't recognize. Older, distinguished, with kind eyes that reminded her of Harrison. I'd like you to meet my grandfather, William Cross. Grandpa, this is Charlotte. William Cross extended his hand with a warm smile. The famous Charlotte. I've heard so much about you. Nothing too terrible, I hope. On the contrary, Harrison tells me you've revolutionized our approach to childhood education. And Eli talks about you so much. I feel like I already know you. They chatted for a few minutes about the program, about Charlotte's plans for expansion, about the measurable improvements they were seeing in the children's development. William asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in her work. You know, he said as their conversation wound down, this reminds me of something my father used to say. He built this family's wealth, but he always insisted that money was just a tool. The real measure of success was what you used that tool to build. He gestured around the learning center, taking in the children playing, learning, growing. This is what wealth should build. Opportunities for those who need them most. Hope for the future. Investment in human potential. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And succeeding brilliantly, from what I can see. After William left, Charlotte and Eli walked through the center together, observing the children, talking with the teachers, reviewing progress reports. You know what I love most about this? Eli said as they watched a shy little girl named Sophia successfully share her toys with another child. What? 6 months ago, you were worried about fitting into my world. Now you're changing it. Charlotte smiled. It's not just your world anymore. It's our world, and we're building it together. 1 year after the disastrous family dinner that had started it all, Charlotte found herself once again standing outside the gates of the Cross family estate. But this time, everything was different. She wasn't wearing a thrift store coat, but a dress she'd bought with her own money from her new salary. Not designer, but not discount either. She wasn't nervous about fitting in, but excited to share the latest updates from the Learning Center. And she wasn't alone. "You ready for this?" Eli asked, taking her hand. Charlotte looked down at the engagement ring on her finger, a different ring than the promise ring from a year ago, but just as perfect, just as meaningful. They'd gotten engaged 3 months ago, in the original Learning Center, surrounded by children and teachers and the community they'd built together. "I'm ready." The family dinner was warm, welcoming, full of genuine conversation and laughter. Victoria asked detailed questions about the expansion plans for the learning centers. Vivian and Celeste shared stories from their own volunteer work, inspired by Charlotte's example. Harrison beamed with pride as Charlotte presented the Foundation's annual report, showing the measurable impact their programs were having. But the moment that meant the most came when Harrison stood to make a toast. "1 year ago," he said, raising his glass, "Charlotte taught our family an important lesson about character, about generosity, about seeing the person instead of the package." He smiled at Charlotte, the same warm smile he'd given her when she was sharing her sandwich with a stranger. "Tonight, I want to toast not just Charlotte and Eli's engagement, but Charlotte's incredible work this past year. She's touched hundreds of lives, changed our Foundation's approach to education, and shown us all what it means to use privilege responsibly." He paused, looking around the table at his family. "Charlotte, you came into our family by sharing a simple turkey sandwich with someone you thought was in need. That generosity, that instinct to help others, has become the foundation of everything you've built since then." The Mickey and Rose Adams Learning Centers are now serving over 500 children across 5 communities. But more than that, they're proving that when you invest in human potential, when you see worth in every child regardless of their circumstances, miraculous things happen. Harrison raised his glass higher. "To Charlotte, who reminds us every day that the best wealth isn't what we accumulate, but what we give away. And to Eli, who was smart enough to recognize the treasure he'd found." As everyone raised their glasses, Charlotte felt a profound sense of completion. Not because she'd won over Eli's family or because she'd proven herself worthy of their acceptance, but because she'd found her place in the world, a place where her values aligned with her opportunities, where her past prepared her for her future, where her generous heart could make the biggest possible difference. Later that evening, as she and Eli walked through the gardens behind the estate, Charlotte thought about the journey that had brought her here. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't shared that sandwich?" she asked. Eli considered this. "I think somehow, some way, we would have found each other. And you would have ended up doing exactly what you're doing now." "Why?" "Because this is who you are, Charlotte. Someone who sees need and responds to it. Someone who believes in human potential. Someone who uses whatever resources she has to make the world better." He stopped walking and turned to face her, the moonlight catching the promise ring he now wore, his own symbol of commitment to building a life based on honesty, generosity, and love. The sandwich was just the beginning. Everything that followed, the job, the learning centers, our relationship, your place in this family, all of that happened because you've consistently chosen to be kind, to be generous, to see the best in people. Charlotte looked back at the house, glowing with warm light, filled with a family that had become her family. Then she looked toward the city, where tomorrow she would continue the work of expanding opportunities for children who needed them most. "I used to think my parents' legacy was just the memories I carried," she said. "But I think I understand now. Their legacy is every choice I make to help someone else, every child whose life gets a little bit better because of the work we're doing, every moment when I choose generosity over fear. And every sandwich you share with a stranger who turns out to be family," Eli added with a grin. Charlotte laughed, remembering that cold November day when she'd stood outside these same gates, nervous and uncertain, with nothing but a turkey sandwich and a generous heart. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the biggest changes in life. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to be yourself, really, truly yourself, the world opens up in ways you never imagined possible. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, Charlotte smiled at the thought that somewhere out there, another person might be standing outside their own version of intimidating gates, clutching their own simple lunch, wondering if they belong. And maybe, just maybe, They'd find the courage to share what they had with a stranger and discover that generosity is always the key that opens the most important doors. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.